Hi there, I'm Todd Miller, 7-8 culinary arts teacher with Lakehead Public Schools. I've got another recipe for you to try today, but before we start, a few reminders. First off, if you're unsure about any of the equipment that you're going to be using, make sure you ask someone that has some more kitchen experience, especially when you're working around the stove, oven, and even the microwave. Make sure you understand how they work, and always have a pair of oven mitts handy, even for the microwave. Some of the equipment gets hot in there. If the recipe calls for the use of a knife, make sure that you're really comfortable using a sharp knife like this. Again, ask somebody that has some experience and practice first before using it for your recipe. Always hold the knife with a lot of conviction in one hand, and with your other hand, you want to make sure that you keep your hand in that claw position, kind of like you're holding a tennis ball. Always keep your hand curled back so that the knife doesn't come in contact with your fingertips. Before you start the recipe, make sure you watch the entire video, read the recipe entirely through, make sure you understand everything, and of course, get all of your equipment and your ingredients out first. It makes the recipe go a lot more smoothly. And finally, don't forget, you made the mess, you're in charge of cleaning up. Don't leave a dirty kitchen for someone else. So have a great time cooking. Okay, so today we're going to make chocolate chip cookies. Now there's a number of different ways to make chocolate chip cookies. I have a couple of different recipes, separate videos for each. The kind I'm going to show you today is more of a fluffy kind of chocolate chip cookie. A little bit of crisp on the outside, but a lot chewier on the inside. And they're also, you'll see when we see them at the end, you'll see that they kind of puff up quite a bit, but they don't spread out as much as other chocolate chip cookies. So for this recipe, it is best if you have one of these, a stand mixer. If you only have a hand mixer, that will work too, but a stand mixer is great. The other recipe that I have for crispy chocolate chip cookies does not require one of these. So if you don't have one of these at home or even a hand mixer, I'd suggest making the other kind. And the reason for this is we're going to be starting off with some butter. And the butter has to be really cold. It has to come straight from the fridge. And we have to chop it up into little chunks like this first, about 1 centimeter cubed. We're using a sharp knife for this, so I've got one hand on top of the knife so it's nowhere near the blade, and I'm pushing down to chop them into little cubes. Now that's going to go into our stand mixer, which is going to cream them up along with some sugar. In this case, we're going to be using brown sugar. So I've got 1/2 cup, which is the same as 115 grams of butter. It's really hard to measure butter using cups like this. So a lot of times they give the measurement in grams. So if you have a little scale at home like that, that works great. So I've got 1/2 cup of butter in there, and we're going to add some brown sugar as well. We're going to use 3/4 cup of brown sugar. It's quite a bit. Now, normally when you're measuring sugar, you just scoop what you need and then scrape off any extra. Brown sugar is a little bit different. We want to pack it down. Almost all recipes call for packed brown sugar, so that when you turn it out, it stays together, almost like you're making a sandcastle. We need 3/4 cup. I'm using a 1/4 cup scoop, so I have to do that, of course, 3 times. And then we're going to turn on our stand mixer and get that all creamed up. Stand mixer goes on. Again, if you're not sure about how to use any equipment at home, make sure you ask somebody. So while that's cooking, we'll take a look at the dry ingredients. We'll use a separate bowl for that, and we're going to start off with some flour. We need 1 3/4 cups of flour. I'm going to use a 1/2 cup measuring scoop to start here. Scoop in more than I need. Scrape off the extra. Now I'll have to do that 3 times. 2. That gets me to 1½ cups. And then I need an extra 1/4 cup to measure in. To that, we add a couple of other ingredients that we need. We need some baking powder first. Half a teaspoon, of baking powder. Don't get mixed up between 1/2 cup and 1/2 teaspoon. That's this much. And we need a little bit of baking soda as well. Both of these are going to help our cookies to rise up a bit. Like I said, they're a bit fluffier. Plus the baking soda also makes them a little bit more brown. So a little bit of baking soda as well as a little bit of salt. Using a whisk is the best way, as always, to mix up our dry ingredients. And it just takes a few seconds that way to make sure that your baking powders and soda, as well as the salt, are all mixed in with the flour. So, while that was going on, we can see now that our brown sugar and our butter is all mixed together really well. Creamed it up, and so now we're going to add an egg. The egg we have to add right from the fridge. It should be nice and cold. Crack the egg on the side, and it can go right in with your mixture. I'm going to turn that up a little bit so it mixes in well. We're also going to add a little bit of vanilla too, 1 teaspoon, which I know is about a capful using this, so I'm going to cheat a little bit and just put my capful in. So we let that egg mix in with the butter and the brown sugar, and then all we're going to do is add our dry ingredients to our wet ingredients. We're not going to mix them up too long once we add them. We don't want to over mix them, kind of like when you're making muffins, but we do want to make sure everything's mixed together well. So I can just carefully pour in from the side my dry ingredients, keeping an eye on it to make sure everything's mixing well together. Just before it finishes mixing, I'm going to add my chocolate chips. I'm using milk chocolate chips for these. The other milk chocolate chips also come in semi-sweet. The semi-sweet will stick together more in the cookies. The milk chocolate tend to melt a bit more. So it's up to you which one you want to use. This is just what I had today, so that's what we're using. So just before it's finishing to mix, slowly pour in my chocolate chips, and there's quite a few of them. Let that all mix together. And there we go. Now we're going to do one other thing as well to make sure that these cookies are fluffy but don't spread out very much. We're going to take the batter, our dough, and we're going to put it in the freezer. So I take all my dough off this is called a paddle, so I take that all off the paddle. I'm going to take a piece of plastic wrap, and we're going to dump the dough onto the plastic wrap. We don't want to work this too much. We want to keep it cold. That cold butter, that cold egg in there, we want to keep everything cold. So I'm going to work the dough together as quickly as I can. I'm going to make it into a long cylinder. We're going to cover it with the plastic wrap, and we're going to put that in the freezer. About 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a bit longer if you want to. The other neat thing about this is we can form them into cookies after. You can refreeze them, and you can just make cookies then whenever you feel like it. So just roll that up in there. I can spread it out a bit more now. Give it a bit of a roll to try to smooth it out. This will also make it easier after too when we're forming the cookies. I'm going to put that in the freezer, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes and go on with the next step. Alright, our cookie dough has been in the freezer for about 15 minutes. Give it a chance to firm up a little bit more, and now we're ready to get these cookies in the oven. We're going to be using a cookie sheet for that. That's a kind of baking sheet, but you can see that the sides are very, very low. If you only have at home a baking sheet like this with the top, with the thicker sides, it'll still work. These are better, but if you only have one kind, don't worry, you can still make them work. We do need to grease the pan first. You could use parchment paper. You could grease it with butter if you want. I'm just going to use some cooking spray, about 30 centimeters away, a little light spray on it, just so that they don't stick. Now I unwrap my cookie dough, and then because it's been in the freezer, one thing I have found is I can actually just cut these into slices to put right onto our baking sheet. Now for that job, I'm not going to use the sharp knife that I use to cut the butter. I'm going to use the serrated knife. It's better, it has a nice cutting edge on it. So I'm just going to go along and cut very thin chunks. And sometimes you might, if you want, you can take them, you can form them into a ball if you'd rather do them like that. You can keep them in the little cylinder shape that they had. Whatever works better for you. Sometimes you're going to be cutting a bit through some chocolate chips. You can make them as thick as you want or as thin. I could have made this log a lot shorter so you can make really large cookies that you just have to cook a little bit longer. The fun thing about it is you try out the recipe and then you can start experimenting. A lot of recipes will tell you one way to do things, but that doesn't mean that it's the only way to do it. So I just keep doing little slices like this. Like I mentioned before, once I've sliced these, I can put this back in the freezer, let them freeze completely, and then I could put these into some kind of freezer-proof container. Now you've got cookies that are already made, ready to go. All you have to do is preheat your oven. So you can make a whole bunch of these, and then you can have fresh cookies without making a mess in your kitchen whenever the mood strikes you. Now, because these cookies tend to rise up more than spread out, I can fit more on a pan than I could with my crispy chocolate chip cookies. So keep in mind, if you're trying both kinds, you have to think in advance about how much room they're going to take up once they're cooked. So I'm going to keep this one rolled up like that so we can take a look after and see what it looks like. The others I'm going to keep out like this. I would need a second tray, but it's best if you can to bake them one at a time. So I'm going to bake one batch first, and then we'll come back and bake the other and see what we get. These are going to go into a 350-degree oven, preheated, which means it's already been turned on for a little while to make sure it's nice and hot. And they're going to take about 15 minutes. And then we'll take a look at what they look like. All right, our puffy cookies are out of the oven. Remember, they were cooking for 15 minutes approximately at 350 degrees. It depends on the oven. And what we can see here is this is the second batch actually. Just a slight golden brown color on top. See that they didn't spread out very much. They're still nice and puffy. Now they just came out of the oven. If I pick them up right now, they are too soft. They'll start to crumble and fall apart. They need to sit for about 2 to 3 minutes first. And then once they've sat for a couple of minutes, they do need to go on a cooling rack to finish cooling completely. So this is the first batch I put in. They've completely cooled. You can see with these ones, these are the ones where I just cut slices. So they did spread out a little bit more, didn't puff up quite as much. This is the one that I rolled up, which is like the second batch that I did. So whatever you want them to look like, whatever is easiest for you or what you would enjoy, that's 2 different ways that you can make these cookies. These are great once they're cooled a little bit, and they'll keep in a sealed container for a couple of days in your cupboard. Make sure you don't eat the raw cookie dough as you're cooking it. It's got raw eggs in it, uncooked flour. As good as that tastes, these taste even better, so make sure you wait for the end. So enjoy making these kind, and again, if you don't have a stand mixer, you might want to try the crispy chocolate chip cookies recipe that can be made without a stand mixer, even a hand mixer. Check that out as well. Happy cooking.